What if I told you that everything you've believed in is nothing but a beautiful, yet complete illusion? Forget all those heartwarming TV shows about high society and romantic novels. Behind the fairy tale atmosphere of lavish 19th century balls, behind the sparkling chandeliers and the rustle of expensive gowns, lay an incredibly harsh, cold, and utterly pragmatic financial system. You probably think that young ladies in beautiful gowns whirled across spacious dance floors in search of that one true love. Not a chance. Spoiler alert, there was no romance to speak of. Their every move, every flutter of an eyelash, every smile, and even a fan accidentally dropped to the floor were governed by the harsh laws of strict commercial calculation and cold-blooded family interests. In essence, those luxurious ballrooms were nothing less than a stock exchange. Want to know how this system actually worked? Then be sure to watch this video all the way through, because in it we'll reveal the shocking underbelly of this business. You'll learn how caring, aristocratic mothers transformed into ruthless PR managers and agents, while their own daughters became the main, most valuable, and most marketable commodity of London's prestigious season. The stakes there were higher than on Wall Street. Ready to take off your rose-colored glasses and peek behind the scenes of a glamorous era? Then hit the like button right now. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel with the bell icon so you don't miss the historical truth. And let's get started. Are you ready to learn the truth about the hidden workings of London high society? The British aristocracy had built a complex system of social interactions that ran like a fine clock. Right on schedule, in April, hundreds of wealthy families would leave their spacious country estates. They would move into London mansions, bringing along a large number of well-trained servants. The city would instantly come to life, filled with the clatter of wooden wheels and the glow of evening lanterns. Visiting cards served as the primary means of communication during this period. These rectangles of thick paper determined each person's current social status. Hired footmen delivered them to various addresses, leaving them on large silver trays. The size of the card and the folded corners conveyed important coded information to the recipient. Experienced hostesses could read these cues, deciding for themselves whom to admit into the house. Morning visits were subject to strict time limits and lasted exactly 15 minutes. Guests sat in brightly lit parlours, discussing the weather or the latest social gossip. Black tea was served in delicate porcelain cups, along with small sandwiches. Staying longer than the allotted time was considered a sure sign of poor manners. Attentive hosts kept an eye on the clock, preparing to promptly welcome the next group of visitors. The policy for sending out invitations to evening events resembled complex strategic planning. Guest lists were compiled and revised 3 times a week. Ball organisers strove to gather the wealthiest people in a single, enormous hall. Paper invitations were sent out 1 month before the planned grand celebration. Receiving an unexpected refusal dealt a serious blow to the reputation of the entire host party. Preparing the ballroom itself required the involvement of dozens of skilled hired workers. The wooden floors were polished with special wax until they achieved a perfect mirror-like shine. Hundreds of new, expensive wax candles were carefully inserted into the enormous crystal chandeliers. Velvet upholstered chairs for guests' companions were arranged in neat rows along the walls. The orchestra was positioned on a raised platform so that the loud music would fill the entire space. A system of strict recommendations from influential social patrons played a significant role. Newcomers could not simply show up at the doorstep of a renowned London salon. They had to be personally introduced by someone with an impeccable reputation in society. The formal introduction procedure consisted of precisely calibrated, regulated bows. A single misstep could permanently close the doors to high society for a person. Access to the most exclusive social events was controlled by a special committee of ladies. They met regularly at a private club and issued paper vouchers granting admission. These distinguished women held absolute power over the fates of the young fair participants. Denial of the coveted pass meant complete social ruin for a family. Their harsh decisions were final and were made in the strictest confidence. Evening dinners preceding lavish balls served as an excellent venue for business negotiations. Between 10 and 20 invited dignitaries gathered around long tables. The lavish menu consisted of numerous courses, including soups and sweet desserts. The seating arrangement strictly reflected the guests' social standing and the size of their accumulated wealth. It was here that the first assessments of potential wealthy candidates for future marriage took place. The success of the entire season depended directly on the flawless coordination of the elements listed above. Well-connected families spent enormous resources to maintain the appearance of absolute ease and effortless grace. Behind every graceful, effortless dance lay long weeks of hard work by hired staff. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these rules, so please share them in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to our channel to keep up with new historical videos. Can you guess how long it took to prepare a young lady and how much it cost? Making her debut in high society required colossal and regular financial investments from the family. The average budget allocated for a single season could range from £1,000 to £3,000. This enormous sum was spent on ensuring the debutante's complete visual superiority over her rivals. Financial and organizational preparations began several long years before her first appearance. One of the most significant expenses was the young debutante's wardrobe. A young woman needed between 50 and 70 new dresses for various social occasions. Morning gowns were made of light-colored cotton and were relatively simple in appearance. Dresses for daytime visits required more expensive, heavy fabrics and intricate cuts. Evening ball gowns were made from the finest French silk and embellished with delicate lace. Each dress was always paired with matching, expensive accessories and shoes. Silk shoes wore out quickly on the parquet floor and had to be replaced regularly. Long gloves were bought by the dozen, as appearing in soiled ones was considered a disgrace. Elegant fans made of ivory and feathers cost a small fortune. Owning all these items underscored the high status and wealth of the debutante's family. Transportation costs also put a huge dent in the budgets of provincial aristocrats. Maintaining their own carriage in the capital required renting stables and purchasing fodder. Many preferred to hire luxurious carriages for the entire duration of the spring season. Coachmen in expensive livery drove families to endless receptions and evening balls. The appearance of the carriage served as a direct advertisement of the financial prosperity of those sitting inside. Jewelry served as a kind of price tag, demonstrating the wealth of a particular family. Debutantes were permitted to wear only pearls or small diamonds in modest settings. Heavy family heirlooms remained the exclusive privilege of married and adult women of means. Nevertheless, purchasing a high-quality pearl necklace required a very substantial financial outlay. Fathers often borrowed money against their land to adorn their daughters. Hosting a dinner party cost the hosts a small fortune. Hiring a renowned French chef cost 3 times as much as hiring a regular chef. Rare, exotic fruits brought from distant southern lands were displayed on the tables. Expensive wines flowed freely to impress the distinguished guests with incredible generosity. Such lavish displays served as an investment in the future successful marriage of the young daughter. Payment for etiquette and dance lessons began long before the trip to the capital. The best instructors were hired to teach the young woman how to hold her back and fan properly. Music teachers trained her voice and taught her to play an expensive parlor piano. All these basic skills were considered the bare minimum required for a successful match. A clumsy or poorly educated young woman had no chance of attracting a wealthy heir. The total cost for a single season often exceeded the annual income of an average farm. Many noble aristocrats went into enormous debt for the sake of securing a successful marriage for their daughters. The financial risk was colossal, but the potential long-term benefit outweighed absolutely all concerns. Do you agree that such extravagant spending was justified for the sake of status? Please share your thoughts on this, and in the next chapter, you'll learn about the unique features of balls. What lies behind the beautiful facade of the ballroom will shatter your illusions forever. The space of the glittering dance floor was delicately divided into invisible, yet very strict zones of influence. Young ladies sat demurely on chairs arranged along the walls, awaiting invitations. Adult men assessed their appearance, moving slowly across the center of the brightly lit hall. Each dance performed was a way to directly showcase the merchandise to a potentially wealthy buyer. The key tool for managing the evening was a miniature ballroom booklet with a pencil attached. In this small cardboard booklet, the gentlemen wrote their names next to the names of the dancers. A booklet filled to the brim served as the main indicator of a young debutante's stunning success. Empty lines eloquently testified to a complete social failure and a lack of proper interest. The young women carefully concealed the blank pages from the prying eyes of their envious rivals. The rules of ballroom etiquette strictly regulated the number of dances a young woman could have with a single partner. Agreeing to 3 dances in a row with one gentleman was considered the height of impropriety. Such bold behavior was regarded as an open and official announcement of an imminent engagement. Mothers carefully ensured that their daughters divided their attention among several suitors. Excessive focus on a single man could easily scare off other promising suitors. Physical contact during the dance routines was kept to an absolute minimum. The partners barely touched each other with their hands, which were encased in tight, snow-white gloves. The famous Viennese waltz was long considered scandalous because of the close physical proximity of the dancers. Conservative London hostesses forbade its performance in their staid, classical drawing rooms. It was not until the mid-19th century that this whirling dance became a widely accepted norm. Conversations during the measured movement across the ballroom were subject to strict rules of social decorum. Only neutral topics related to music, the weather, or theatrical productions were discussed. Loud laughter or overly emotional, animated gestures were strictly condemned by the observers present. A young woman was expected to display submissiveness, modesty, and a light, pleasant smile on her face. Men were not looking for interesting conversation partners, but rather for compliant and convenient future wives. The language of the fan served as a secret code for conveying messages hidden from society. A folded fan pressed to the lips signaled a request for caution and silence. Quickly fanning oneself with an open fan demonstrated open affection for the gentleman standing nearby. A fan snapped shut served as a clear sign of refusal and an end to the current conversation. Skillful use of this object allowed young women to communicate right under the watchful eyes of strict mothers. The evening's musical accompaniment set the rhythm for the entire complex social game taking place in the ballroom. The orchestra played quadrilles, polkas, and waltzes according to a pre-approved printed list. The breaks between dances were used for a quick exchange of views and to find new partners. During these brief pauses, footmen served refreshing drinks on large silver trays. The stifling heat from hundreds of burning candles made being in the ballroom a serious ordeal. The end of the ball marked the conclusion of yet another grueling round on this marketplace. Exhausted debutantes climbed into their carriages, discussing the results of the evening with their mothers. They carefully analyzed every word spoken and every glance from potential wealthy suitors. The ball book remained the only tangible evidence of the evening's success or failure. If you enjoy this historical investigation, be sure to like this video. Guess what happened next when a debutante finally caught the eye of a wealthy heir? At that moment, all the pretentious high society romance instantly gave way to hard-nosed business. Fathers of the families and the experienced professional lawyers they had hired would actively step in. They would sit down at massive oak tables covered with stacks of thick financial documents. A long and complex process of negotiating the size of the dowry and future financial payments would begin. The marriage contract was a detailed, multi-page document that took into account all possible risks. The main point was always the size of the dowry that the father provided for his daughter. These funds came under the husband's full control immediately after the official signing of the papers. The woman lost the right to independently dispose of the money she herself had brought into her new family. Lawyers meticulously described the procedure for transferring cash, securities, and land parcels. In return, the bride's family demanded strict guarantees of financial security for the young woman. A key concept was the widow's allowance, which guaranteed an income in the event of the husband's early death. The amount of this fixed annual payment became the subject of the most bitter legal disputes. The bride's father sought to negotiate the highest possible sum to secure his daughter's future. The groom's family, on the other hand, tried to minimize these future mandatory financial obligations for the estate. A separate important clause specified the so-called pin money for the young wife. This was a strictly fixed sum given to the wife for her personal minor expenses. These funds were used to pay for outfits, cosmetics, and small gifts for the servants. The amount of this allowance depended directly on the overall financial situation of the wealthy groom's family. The absence of this clause in the contract left the woman entirely at the mercy of her husband's whims. The complex system of inheritance also required detailed written provisions in every contract. British entail law mandated that the main estate be passed exclusively to the eldest male heir. Lawyers had to provide for the financial security of any younger sons and daughters. Special trust funds were established, the assets of which could not be spent on day-to-day needs. These convoluted arrangements were designed to preserve the family's wealth from complete ruin and fragmentation. The negotiation process could drag on for several long months due to the intransigence of both sides. Lawyers exchanged lengthy formal letters clarifying every comma in the draft agreement. Sometimes engagements were broken off solely because of the inability to agree on a specific amount for the widow's dower. At that moment, absolutely none of the adults cared about the young couple's feelings. The deal had to be profitable and secure under British law. The signing of the final document took place in a solemn and extremely serious business setting. Sheets of thick parchment, covered in the lawyer's fine calligraphic handwriting, were laid out on the table. The parties affixed their sweeping signatures and sealed them with heavy wax family seals. Only after this formal act was the engagement officially declared a fait accompli to society. There was no turning back, and the preparations for the wedding were set in motion at full speed. Many aristocrats viewed marriage as an effective way to save their bankrupt estates. They sought out the daughters of wealthy industrialists who were willing to exchange vast sums of money for a prestigious title. Such unions were cynically referred to as a convenient merger of good lineage and fresh, substantial capital. Lawyers worked with particular diligence in these cases, protecting the money from being squandered by a spendthrift lord. Marriage ultimately became a mere transaction for the purchase of high social status. The system of marriage contracts made divorce practically impossible and a financially ruinous undertaking. The division of property, strictly secured in trusts, required a special resolution from the national parliament. In the event of a scandal, a woman would lose absolutely all her money, her status, and access to her own children. Lawyers reduced people's lives to dry, lengthy lists of material assets and liabilities. How fair do you think this commercial approach to starting a family was? In the next chapter, we'll take a detailed look at the daily schedule of the women attending this fair. The schedule of a typical débutante's day during the season was striking in its intensity and monotony. The morning began quite late, around 10 o'clock, after an exhausting evening ball. A maid would bring light tea and toast directly to the bedroom of the young, weary mistress. This was followed by a lengthy routine of washing, combing her hair, and selecting the right light-colored morning dress. This took no less than 2 hours of daily, painstaking work by her hired personal staff. The daytime was set aside for making the obligatory brief courtesy visits to the homes of acquaintances. The carriage shuttled between mansions, leaving calling cards or lingering for 15 minutes. During this time, the young women showcased their modest daytime attire and their ability to engage in small talk. A small parasol, which protected their pale skin from the sun's rays, was an essential accessory for such outings. A tan was considered the lot of common labourers and was absolutely unacceptable for an aristocratic woman. Closer to midnight, the carriage was once again drawn up to the porch for the trip to the grand ball. This was the highlight of the long day, the very reason for all the springtime bustle. Dancing to loud music continued until 3 or 4 o'clock in the early, cold morning. The stifling heat, feet rubbed raw, and nervous tension were hidden behind polite, rehearsed smiles. By dawn, carriages were taking the utterly exhausted, yet with no right to rest, young women back to their homes. Rest during the day was strictly regulated and left virtually no time for privacy. Reading was permitted only from an approved list of morally impeccable, edifying books. Letter writing was monitored by older family members to avoid even the slightest hint of scandal. Even a simple stroll through the garden required the mandatory presence of a trustworthy chaperone nearby. Life turned into an endless performance with strictly prescribed roles and scenes. The debutantes' diets were also strictly regulated to maintain their pale complexions and slender figures. Eating meat or hearty dishes in public was considered a sign of coarse, peasant-like appetites. At balls, the young women would merely make a symbolic gesture of touching their food, limiting themselves to fruit or tiny pastries. Real, hearty meals took place in secret, far from the judgmental eyes of strangers. Such restrictions often led to fainting spells from hunger, right in the middle of a crowded ballroom. Keeping the wardrobe in pristine condition required an incredible amount of effort on the part of the numerous servants. A soiled hem on an evening gown or a torn glove could cause a catastrophic embarrassment. Maids spent their nights scrubbing out stains, sewing on torn ruffles, and ironing meters of delicate lace. Every morning, the entire outfit had to look as if it were being worn for the very first time. Appearance remained the primary weapon in this grueling, months-long social battle. Weekends did not bring the desired relief from this endless social race. On Sundays, attending church services in one's finest attire was considered mandatory. After church, families would go for walks in the park, continuing to put on a show for society. There were no exceptions or sick days in this rigid system. A young woman was required to smile and shine, even when she was at the end of her rope. This non-stop marathon lasted a full 4 months without the slightest opportunity to take a break. Many participants lost weight, suffered from nervous exhaustion, and were constantly sleep-deprived. However, complaints were strictly suppressed by their mothers, who reminded them of the high cost of the entire event. The price of failure was too high to allow even a moment's physical weakness. The market mechanism spun relentlessly, grinding the energy of youth into hard cash. This is what happens behind closed doors when the reputations of young ladies are discussed. Every action of a debutante was under the constant and vigilant scrutiny of the surrounding high society. A young woman had absolutely no right to be alone in a room with a man who was not a relative. Her chaperone always followed her like a shadow, listening intently to every whispered word. The slightest deviation from the norms of etiquette instantly became fodder for devastating salon gossip. In the 19th century, the concept of being compromised had catastrophic consequences for any woman's future. A chance unescorted encounter in the park could put an end to all marriage prospects. Lingering in the garden during an evening ball was interpreted as an irreparable moral lapse. A letter written to a man without parental permission was considered concrete evidence of complete moral decay. The judges of high society showed no mercy and punished offenders with complete exclusion from their circle. The institution of chaperones, or companions, served as the primary supervisory system at this fair. Most often, this role was filled by elderly aunts or widows from impoverished aristocratic branches. They sat along the walls at balls, possessing a phenomenal memory for faces and events. Their main task was to prevent any unwanted contact and to safeguard the reputation of the young woman in their care. The final market value of the young woman they accompanied depended directly on their vigilance. Gaze and eye contact were also governed by unspoken but very strict rules of propriety. A direct, prolonged gaze into a man's eyes was regarded as a bold and indecent invitation. A debutante was expected to look modestly downward, only occasionally casting timid glances at her conversation partner. Excessive hand gestures betrayed a lack of proper upbringing and poor manners. A woman's body became a frozen mannequin, programmed to produce standard, approved reactions. Any display of autonomy or independence of character was ruthlessly suppressed by her older relatives. The young woman could not choose her own route for her morning walk or the store where she would shop. Her every move was laid out in a schedule drawn up by her experienced and pragmatic mother. Friendships with people of questionable reputation were immediately cut off to preserve the purity of her own name. Her individuality was erased to conform to the standard of the ideal commodity on the marriage market. A particular danger lurked for young women during fashionable country picnics and outings. Far from the strict confines of London drawing rooms, the illusion of freedom often led to fatal mistakes. An accidental fall from a horse or a torn dress could give rise to wild speculation upon their return. Chaperones redoubled their vigilance, not allowing their charges to hide behind the trees in the park. Nature was considered a hostile environment that tempted one to violate established social taboos. Rumours spread through the capital at astonishing speed, thanks to an army of servants and footmen. Maids eavesdropped on conversations and passed on information to other wealthy households for a few coins. Coachmen knew all the routes and could easily confirm the fact of an unwanted secret meeting. The family lived in a state of constant paranoia, hiding even the slightest missteps from outsiders. A single careless word could instantly devalue her father's financial investments of many years. A loss of reputation meant immediate expulsion from the capital back to a boring country estate. A disgraced young woman was hidden from society so that the shadow of scandal would not fall on her younger sisters. The chances of a profitable marriage would plummet to zero within a matter of days. Reputation was the most fragile and, at the same time, the most valuable asset in this ruthless market. How do you assess such strict behavioral standards for young women of that time? In the next chapter, you'll learn about the social isolation faced by those who failed to meet these expectations. The rules of the market were merciless toward those products that failed to find a buyer in time. A young woman had a maximum of 3 seasons to secure a successful marriage contract. In her first year, she was considered a fresh debutante and attracted the public's full attention. By her second year, her chances diminished slightly, and her family's expectations became more realistic and modest. A third unsuccessful season turned her into a stale commodity, rapidly losing its original value. Some unmarried aristocratic women chose to become paid companions to wealthier, younger ladies. This was one of the few professions considered acceptable for women of noble British descent. They accompanied other people's daughters to balls, kept an eye on their reputations, and received a modest salary. This work required immense patience and the ability to be an invisible shadow in a brightly lit ballroom. They watched others' happiness, having forever bid farewell to their hopes of starting a family of their own. The position of governess became yet another option for impoverished, unmarried women from good families. They moved into other people's homes to teach children French and proper manners. Their social status existed in a strange grey area between hired servants and the mansion's owners. They did not eat with the family, nor did they go down to the kitchen to join the ordinary workers. Loneliness and social isolation became their constant and only true companions in life. Failed attempts to find a husband often led to deep psychological trauma and chronic depression. A woman raised with the sole purpose of becoming a wife lost all sense of the meaning of her continued existence. Society instilled in her a sense of guilt for failing to fulfill her primary purpose. She was viewed as a broken mechanism, unfit for its intended use within the system. She became invisible to the glittering London social scene that had so recently beckoned her. Intellectual or creative pursuits for old maids were encouraged only within very narrow limits. They were allowed to paint watercolors, embroider pillows, or collect herbariums in the quiet of a country park. Publishing books or engaging seriously in science was considered eccentric and unbecoming of a lady. Their energy and talents were confined within the four walls of a modestly furnished back room on the estate. Enormous human potential was squandered due to the rigid constraints of the established commercial market. Even participation in charity work was strictly regulated by parish priests and senior matrons. Unmarried women could sew clothes for the poor or raise funds for the construction of shelters. This gave them the illusion of social significance and allowed them to leave the confines of their homes, at least occasionally. However, leadership positions on committees were always held exclusively by influential married women. Old maids remained in the role of unpaid and unfailing executors of others' orders. The fear of ending up in such a situation drove many young women to enter into frankly unhappy marriages. They agreed to marry old men or men with repulsive and foul tempers. Life with a man they did not love seemed less frightening to them than the prospect of a lonely, impoverished existence. The market left them no choice, forcing them to accept any terms, even the most unfavorable ones. The only alternative to a marriage contract was complete social oblivion. This cruel system of culling worked flawlessly for many long decades. Success was measured solely by the presence of a gold ring on one's finger by the end of the third London summer. Thousands of women lived invisible lives, left behind on the sidelines of this glittering ship. Their fates served as a grim warning to subsequent generations of young, naive debutantes. The machine of the Vanity Fair knew no mercy for those who failed to sell themselves at a high price. The role of the mother in a debutante's success on the marriage market cannot be overstated or summarized briefly. Mothers transformed into ruthless and calculating strategists, managing a complex campaign that lasted many months. Their task was to position their product correctly and find the buyer with the deepest pockets. They studied lists of eligible bachelors as meticulously as brokers study stock market quotes. Every decision was made based on cold calculations and confidential data they had gathered. The gathering of important information began long before the official opening of the spring season in the capital. Mothers used their extensive social networks to find out the income levels of potential candidates. They investigated whether there were any debts, hidden vices, or issues with the inheritance of ancestral estates. Poor aristocrats with grand titles were ruthlessly struck from the preliminary shortlists. Attention was focused exclusively on owners of large, profitable estates and substantial bank accounts. The logistics of attending social events were planned with the precision of a seasoned army general. The mother decided at which ball her daughter should stay longer and which she could leave early. They set priorities, choosing those venues where the concentration of wealthy heirs was highest. Arriving late or leaving early were used as tactical maneuvers to create artificial excitement. A young woman had to be in the spotlight but remain slightly out of reach for mere onlookers. The ability to fend off dangerous rivals at the right moment required extraordinary composure and diplomatic skill. Mothers exchanged venomous compliments, trying to undermine their rivals' reputations in the eyes of the bachelors. They skillfully steered conversations in the right direction, highlighting the flaws of other women's daughters. Subtle hints about poor health or hidden financial problems in a rival's family were brought into play. It was a veritable war in silk dresses, where the winner took all. Supervising the domestic staff was also part of the chief family manager's responsibilities. Mothers would bribe other households' footmen to find out who was visiting the gentleman they were interested in. Their own servants were strictly forbidden from gossiping, under threat of immediate dismissal without a reference. The house turned into a closed fortress, from which only carefully vetted information was released. A leak of information about the father's actual financial situation could derail a lucrative deal in the works. Negotiations with the mothers of potential suitors resembled a complex dance among diplomats at a reception. They met at morning tea parties, testing the waters with subtle hints and generalities. Directness was considered a sign of bad manners and could permanently alienate the other party. Consent to marriage was formed through unspoken understandings, glances, and barely perceptible nods of the head. Only after this preliminary probing did the men and their lawyers officially enter the picture. If the plan failed, the mother always shifted the blame for the failure onto her daughter's fragile shoulders. A smile that wasn't bright enough, a word chosen poorly, all of this was held against the poor girl. The mother never admitted to any mistakes in her brilliant strategic or tactical planning. The debutante would return to the estate feeling deeply guilty for having wasted the family's money. This tyranny was justified solely by concern for the future well-being of the entire noble family. The contrast between the romance novels of the time and the harsh reality was simply colossal. Popular literature described tender feelings, secret trysts, and marriages born of great and pure love. Young women devoured these books, hoping to meet their ideal prince on a white horse. However, real life cruelly shattered these naive dreams against the granite slabs of commerce. The marriage market made no room for feelings, operating solely on dry figures and contracts. Spontaneous displays of emotion or passion were categorically excluded from the equation of a successful union. Society viewed marriage not as a union of two hearts, but as a merger of landholdings. If mutual affection arose between the future spouses, it was considered a pleasant but optional bonus. Most couples got married with barely any knowledge of their chosen partner's character or habits. They only truly got to know one another after the lavish wedding ceremony had ended and the guests had departed. Married life often consisted of a polite but cold coexistence under the same roof. The husband and wife might live in different wings of a vast stone country estate. They would meet at the dinner table to discuss formal household matters, such as the management of the servants. The wife's primary and sole responsibility was to bear a healthy male heir to continue the family line. Once this most important duty was fulfilled, the spouses often drifted apart permanently. The division of spheres of influence in family life was absolute and non-negotiable. The husband managed the finances and his political career and spent his time in exclusive London gentlemen's clubs. The wife organized receptions, managed the numerous servants, and oversaw charitable projects. Encroaching on the other's territory was considered a gross violation of established social norms. Their lives ran parallel, rarely intersecting at a point of genuine emotional connection or understanding. The facade of a happy family was maintained solely to preserve their impeccable reputation in society. At public receptions, the couple displayed impeccable manners and treated each other with courtesy. Scandals, infidelities, and mutual hatred were carefully concealed behind the thick velvet curtains of their mansions. Divorce was a taboo subject, meaning complete exclusion from the ranks of respectable British society. Patience and silence became the chief virtues of a woman trapped in the gilded cage of marriage. The romance glorified in modern films like Bridgerton, is nothing more than a beautiful fairy tale concocted by screenwriters. Reality consisted of hours spent trying on corsets that squeezed internal organs until they ached. It consisted of a constant fear of making a wrong move and ruining the reputation of the entire family. It was hard work, requiring nerves of steel and complete submission of one's will to one's parents. There were no secret kisses in dark gardens due to the constant surveillance by chaperones. The concept of personal space and the right to one's own opinion was absent in Victorian reality. Married women's letters were often read by their husbands, and their expenses were controlled down to the last penny. They could not travel independently or enter into business transactions without their husband's permission. Marriage became the legal form through which a woman transitioned from her father's authority to that of her husband. Free will remained an unattainable luxury, not provided for by the strict marriage contracts of the era. The psychological pressure of this system shattered the characters and destinies of many talented young women. They were forced to wear the masks of submissive and narrow-minded dolls for the rest of their lives. Their true desires and ambitions were buried beneath layers of expensive silk and family obligations. The market demanded a standard, and society ruthlessly molded everyone to fit this single template. Love remained the preserve of poets, while life was built on ledgers. Understanding this harsh truth is essential for a sober view of the history of society's development. Behind the beautiful historical facades lie the fates of people deprived of their basic rights and freedoms. The romanticization of Victorian marriage erases the memory of the humiliations women endured. A study of actual documents and contracts reveals the true, cold price of each such union. The fairy tale of balls crumbles at the very first encounter with the financial statements of the heads of households. The end of the London season came in August, coinciding with the closing of the parliamentary session. The weather in the capital became hot and stifling, and the smells in the streets were unbearably pungent. The aristocracy began a mass exodus from the city, fleeing the summer stifle back to the provinces. Huge trunks were filled with new dresses, and carriages were prepared for the long journey home. The fair closed its doors to tally the financial results of the past grueling months. For successful debutantes, this period meant active preparations for an imminent and lavish wedding. Signed contracts turned into orders for the creation of a dowry with the capital's finest tailors. New invitations were sent out for the ceremonial wedding at the groom's or bride's ancestral estate. The machinery continued to run, shifting from a search mode to a mode of securing the profits earned. Happy mothers proudly accepted congratulations from their less fortunate and envious London rivals. For those who had not found a partner, the departure was accompanied by a bitter sense of disappointment and loss. Fathers tallied their enormous losses as they pored over endless bills from shopkeepers and carriage owners. In the carriages heading north, a heavy, tense, deathly silence reigned among the weary family. The young women were set to spend long months in the rural wilderness, analysing their past mistakes. Preparations for the next, less promising season began practically the very next day after their arrival. However, the social game did not cease entirely with their departure from the bustling British capital. The fall hunting season was beginning, which served as a continuation of the marriage market in a different setting. Groups of unmarried gentlemen were invited to country estates to participate in bird hunts. Young women swapped their silk dresses for walking outfits, continuing to showcase their best qualities. Hunting evenings by the fireplace provided a new opportunity to strengthen the connections begun in London. These autumn house parties cost the hosts no less than renting a mansion in the capital. They had to accommodate dozens of guests, providing them with comfort, horses, and servants for several weeks. The tables were laden with game and expensive wines to demonstrate the family's financial stability. The relaxed atmosphere of a country house often facilitated the final decision on a profitable engagement. The bargaining process moved into a more discreet, yet no less rigorous and calculated phase. The winter months passed in relative calm and with strict budgeting for the coming year. Mothers revised lists of potential candidates, updating information on new heirs and their debts. New gowns were sewn, taking into account the latest trends in the ever-changing French continental fashion. Debutantes took additional music lessons to correct the shortcomings of their previous, unsuccessful spring performance. The wheel of the system never stopped for a moment, demanding ever new financial sacrifices. This entire endless merry-go-round existed solely to redistribute vast fortunes within a narrow circle. The British aristocracy used the institution of marriage as a reliable tool for protecting its class interests. Money remained within the system, pooling and multiplying through multi-page legal contracts. The emotions and fates of individuals were merely collateral damage in this global economic process. The system functioned flawlessly until the laws of history began to undermine its foundations. A study of the London season reveals the true, unvarnished face of the Victorian era. It was a world of fierce competition, where only the wealthiest and most cunning survived and triumphed. The beauty of the attire served merely as expensive packaging for a highly pragmatic and calculating commercial proposition. Understanding the mechanics of this market allows us to take off our rose-colored glasses and see the true cost of status. The history of 19th century marriages is, above all, a history of money, power, and the suppression of free will. We've examined the ruthless structure of the Victorian marriage market with all its harsh rules. Behind the beautiful facades of London mansions lay cold, mathematical calculations and strict, multi-page contracts. 19th century young women were merely powerless pawns in the hands of their calculating parents and lawyers. Let us know in the comments what topics you'd like to see covered in future historical videos on our channel. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new in-depth investigations into the past.